Good afternoon and welcome to the News Roundup for Monday, October 13, 2025. I'm Bill Thomas, and here's what's happening right now. An end to the horror. President Trump holding a peace summit in the Middle East as Israeli hostages and Palestinian prisoners return home and the Gaza war finally comes to an end. A new way to attack the states. A high-ranking former U.S. security official sounding the alarm about the enormous danger posed by China's purchase of American farmland. And both sides say we won't negotiate. A Republican leader predicting that we're now barreling full steam ahead toward the longest government shutdown in our nation's history. Also, the planet's health agency, the top health agency, issues a dire warning about the surging number of drug-resistant infections. And travelers, they're appalled when they find out what the French are trying to pass off as tacos. We'll tell you what's got the food snobs like me all riled up. All this and much more coming up right now on the Big Roundup. We have a lot to get to, and we begin with a historic day in the Middle East. Right now, people in both Israel and Gaza celebrating as the ceasefire is holding up. The last remaining hostages, they're returning home, and a comprehensive deal which could bring long-term peace to the entire region closer than it's ever been. In Israel, crowds began cheering wildly and weeping for joy as they watched the last 20 living hostages reunite with their families. As part of the agreement, Hamas also returning 4 dead bodies to Israel as well. However, there are still 24 additional deceased hostages whose return is, in fact, part of the bargain. Now, in both Gaza and the West Bank, people, they're overjoyed with enormous crowds greeting the return of some 1,900 freed Palestinian prisoners who were also released as part of the deal. And among those liberated, nearly 250 people who were serving life sentences for attacking Israelis. Meanwhile, President Trump was also in the Middle East earlier today, and he took center stage at a couple of prestigious events where he was celebrated for his remarkable achievement in brokering the peace deal. He kicked off his visit by giving a speech to the Israeli parliament and urging its members to translate their country's victory on the battlefield into peace for the entire region. He then hopped a short flight to Egypt, where he chaired a gathering of more than 20 world leaders who were meeting to map out a future for the people of Gaza as well as the rest of the entire area. Still a number of critical sticking points which could threaten, theoretically, the ceasefire agreement. Israel's non-negotiable insistence, for example, that Hamas disarm and leave, which they refuse to do. Another key disagreement concerns who will run Gaza in the future. Right now, the president's peace deal calls for an international group to oversee the running of the enclave, while Hamas says the Strip's leadership should be worked out among the Palestinians themselves. Additionally, the plan calls for the possibility of a future Palestinian state, which is a deal breaker for Israel. Final thought, and this is the News Roundup Lowdown. It's an amazing story, and history has just been made. A vicious, deadly, and incredibly destructive 2-year-long war has come to an end, with both Israel and their aggressor, Hamas, making concessions and both sides appearing to be committed to long-term peace in the region. The path forward, it will be long, complicated, and arduous, and along the way, there will most likely be some bumps in the road. However, by all accounts, the war, it's now over. The Trump administration did everything in its power to support our critical ally, and now it's time to rebuild. Humanitarian aid in the form of food, medicine, and other supplies have already begun flowing into Gaza. And to be clear, the time, effort, and resources necessary to rebuild that region, absolutely overwhelming. However, if a high-stakes war can be brought to an end, then clearly a region, even a war-ravaged one, can indeed be rebuilt. Now, much required debt of gratitude goes to the Trump administration and, more importantly, to President Donald Trump for personally doing everything in his power and his Constitution to aid Israel in its fight to beat back Hamas. And the U.S. will always stand behind one of our most important allies. Your thoughts and comments on history being made right now in the Middle East. And tell us what you're thinking. We're at newsroundupwithbill@gmail.com. And with that, producer Davey lets you and I, and mostly you, go to the email bag and see what folks are saying about really a monumental moment, and not only in Israel's history, but in world history, the way I see it. And what are folks saying?
Okay, Bill, let's start with Nadine, who's writing to us today from Oklahoma City.
Hello, Nadine.
She says, today is the best day in the Middle East in years. I pray for peace and thank God for our president.
Yeah, indeed, for our president. I don't mean to beat up on former President Joe Biden, but this war, it started on Joe Biden's watch. I think Joe Biden was just too preoccupied with too much happening in the world, too much happening here at home. I don't think he had the stamina. I don't think he had the energy to bring that war to a rapid conclusion. But Donald Trump is on the job. Mission accomplished. Moving ahead, and who is next?
Okay, Bill, here's one from Raymond in Rochester, New York.
Hiya, Ray.
And he says, as long as Hamas is around, there will never be peace. They're already causing problems, and I doubt the ceasefire will hold.
Well, I think it will hold, and let's just play it day by day, hour by hour, then day by day, week by week, and so on. You know, Democrats, by the way, are largely quiet today, which kind of struck me as a little peculiar. Did that strike you as odd, Davey?
Well, I haven't really seen anybody make any comments, Bill.
Right, yeah. Well, we didn't hear anything as far as I can tell from Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, AOC, Bernie, Schumer, Hakeem Jeffries, Madam Pelosi, and all the rest. Although, to their credit, President Clinton and Secretary Clinton, they did, in fact, chime in with a hearty pat on the back to the Trump administration, to Donald Trump as well, for his efforts with regard to helping to facilitate an end to a 2-year-long devastating war. All right, change things up just a bit now. Turn our attention to a former U.S. national security official who warns that China could be buying up a whole bunch of farmland right here in the States, all to use as a launching pad to attack our country's military from within our own borders. I don't like it. The former official worked on U.S.-China policy during both Trump administrations, and he says that China is buying up a whole bunch of land which is located near a number of critical American military bases, and that spying, that's just the tip of the iceberg. There is a ton more. Says the ability of a foreign adversary to own large chunks of property which are positioned this close to government facilities could eventually pose an enormous problem to the U.S., and that's in large part due to the nature of modern technologies such as drones. Goes on to warn that a bad actor could easily take advantage of their proximity to key government buildings to launch some form of attack that leaves massive damage in its wake, either in terms of intelligence or to our military's infrastructure. That is inexcusable. That can't happen. The official claims that right now we're looking at an entirely new type of warfare, and he says that allowing China to own farmland here in the States, it's like wrapping up an operational base for our enemy and handing it to our leading geopolitical rival. It's a free gift. People from a number of countries outside of China have also scooped up a whole bunch of American farmland. And right now, they say foreigners own just under 4% of all agricultural property here in the U.S. And there's a growing movement by the Trump administration to put some guardrails on the process. We got to bring this to an end, lickety-split. Now, on a related note, the former security official also says there is growing concern about gigantic Chinese-backed cryptocurrency mining operations, again, right here in the U.S. Says these operations rely on very powerful computers that can be used to sabotage our power grids, and that some of them are located very close to critical American military bases. Goes on to say that right now the view of intelligence officials is that China, they're actively preparing to fight and defeat the U.S. military in a war. There's a lot to take in there. Really think about this. And final thought, this is the News Roundup Lowdown. You know, somewhere along the way, the federal government, they dropped the ball. They allowed certain Chinese entities to purchase large chunks of farmland here in the States. Much of that land strategically close to our military installations. Very unwise. And it all sounds more than just coincidental. And if more than half of the states in our country, I think 29 states, limit or actually ban that practice, then clearly the federal government should do likewise. This is a national security issue in my mind, and one that cannot be ignored. We need to know who these entities are. It's kind of a vague term. Who are these entities, as well as what their purposes are? Are these Chinese entities simply people from China looking for the American dream, or are they somehow involved with the Chinese Communist Party and working on behalf of that country's communist regime? We have to find out. Also, and think about this now, turn the tables for just a bit. Would the average U.S. citizen or a U.S.-based business be allowed to go to China and purchase large amounts of real estate in their country, and then maybe this close, right next door to their military bases? Most likely, CCP would never allow that to happen. And before things get even more out of control, and absolutely they're already out of control, we should contemplate buying those entities out, taking those lands back, and begin scrutinizing more closely just who's buying up our U.S. real estate. Hey, bottom line, you wouldn't spend tons of dough building a massive hen house and then sell 500 acres of land right next door to a guy who raises wild coyotes. Now, this would be a dumb way of doing business. You'd never get your hens to market. Now, share your thoughts or your comments with us, and we're at newsroundupwithbill@gmail.com. I'm concerned, Davey. I'm alarmed. And what are folks saying?
You're not alone, Bill.
Yeah.
Okay, let's start with Oscar in Richmond, Virginia.
Hello, Oscar. What's on your mind, sir?
He says, why don't people realize that communist China is our enemy? They're working around the clock to plot our doom while we sit here twiddling our thumbs.
Yeah, it's very interesting. You're absolutely right. The world is becoming more and more dangerous every day. And while China, they are one of our substantial trading partners. We're in business with China. They're clearly not an ally. They're a nuclear power. They're a threat to Taiwan and others. I think they're a threat to us as well from China and from within our own borders. They're a perpetual cybersecurity threat as well. And to boot, yeah, they're in cahoots with Russia, North Korea, and others, all the bad players. And all of their real estate endeavors here in the States should be very heavily analyzed and scrutinized. It's time for a change. Speaking of changes, let's change things up right now. Switch things up just a bit. Turn our focus to the ongoing government shutdown, which is rapidly approaching a third week. Seems very unlikely to end anytime soon. Republican House Speaker Mike Johnson saying that right now, like an out-of-control locomotive, we're advancing toward one of the longest closures ever, and predicting that by the time it's all said and done, this could wind up being the longest shutdown in our country's entire history. And it's a shutdown we can ill afford. Also says he won't begin negotiating with his Democratic counterparts until they drop their outrageous demands concerning health care. And for their part, Democrats, they're still refusing to budge even an inch. And they say they won't pass any sort of spending bill until the GOP agrees to extend a number of government-funded health care subsidies. The way I see it, I think we have a standoff. Now, in the meantime, the Trump administration has taken advantage of the situation to kind of trim the fat from our bloated government. Yeah, they're starting to fire thousands of federal workers. However, the shutdown also forcing an enormous number of essential federal employees, including a small amount of military personnel, to keep on working, but without getting that paycheck. Think about that. Imagine you going to work, but you don't get paid. Not going to do a very good job, are you? It's also beginning to take its toll in a bunch of other ways, including by forcing the temporary closure of a number of our national museums and by wreaking havoc with our country's airports. One of the most important things in the world, aviation safety, that is paramount. Even with fully staffed air traffic control towers, we have problems on our runways, on our taxiways. We've got to have those airports fully staffed at all times. You know, the Senate currently locked in a stalemate and unable to agree on a short-term spending bill. Lawmakers now pointing to the end of this month as the next possible deadline to break the impasse. That's when health insurance premiums are set to skyrocket and federal workers are due to miss their next round of paychecks. You got to get paid. Final thought, and this is the News Roundup Lowdown. The federal government, they're shut down right now because the Democrats, they refuse to budge on their health care demands with particular regard to the extension of expiring Obamacare tax credits. Republicans have been abundantly clear that nothing's off the table and there's always room to negotiate. But before that happens, first, Democrats have to come to the table, fund the government, therefore reopen the government, and then get down to the business and talk health care shop. For now, Democrats are simply failing their party. They're failing their entire constituency. And in fact, they're failing the entire country with this unnecessary shutdown. This also speaks to a much deeper issue, and one which is constantly thrown around by Bernie Sanders. He has a big question. David, you may have heard this. Bernie Sanders always says, is health care a human right? You ever hear him say that?
I have heard him say that.
Well, look, even some Republicans, they have trouble answering that one. But the answer is unequivocally, absolutely yes. Healthcare is a human right. Healthcare is, in fact, a human right, but with certain caveats. Healthcare is not a constitutional right, such as the right to free speech, the right to keep and bear arms, freedom of religion, and all the rest. Now, look, nobody should be able to stop you or I or anybody from acquiring healthcare insurance. That can be employer-provided insurance, a policy which you purchase from a healthcare group, or for lower-income Americans, government-sponsored Medicaid. And there are additional options as well. Here's the deal. In life, you have the right to purchase any insurance you want: car, fire, life, flood, earthquake insurance, and even health insurance. But it's not the role of the federal government to be in the health insurance industry, and this all belongs in the private sector. Now, tell us what you're thinking. We're at newsroundupwithbill@gmail.com. I feel pretty strongly about that one, Davey. I hope somebody agrees with me. And what do you got?
Well, this thing keeps going on, Bill, and people are not happy.
Yeah. Who's up first?
George in Athens, Georgia.
Talk to us, George. What are you thinking?
He says, if Dems are not willing to negotiate, how do they ever expect to end this thing?
Yeah, exactly. And it is Democrats who aren't negotiating. Republicans have been very candid about this. Speaker Johnson's been candid. The president's been candid. Come to the table. Let's talk. Let's get this bill signed. And once that's signed, the government's reopened, up and running, then we can revisit these healthcare issues and maybe come to a conclusion, a solution. But right now, it's Democrats that are holding up the entire program. Very good. And who's up next?
Okay, Bill, here's a bit of a different view from Liv in Tampa, Florida.
Welcome to the program, Liv.
She says, I give the Trump administration credit for their patience. If it was up to me, I'd abolish the entire Congress and start from scratch.
Yeah, that might be a little difficult. Now, as I always say about President Trump, the difficult he'll do right now, the impossible might take a little bit longer. Hey, this healthcare stuff, it's real deep. We're a country with a national debt of close to $38 trillion. And clearly, a cradle-to-the-grave government will end up putting itself out of business in no time at all. It's common sense. Healthcare, yeah, it's got to be rethought, rebuilt, made universally available to everyone, but with nothing more than government oversight, not government ownership. You don't go to the government to buy a car insurance policy or a homeowner's insurance policy, and you shouldn't go to the government to buy a health insurance policy. Now, a couple of additional headlines we're keeping a very close watch on here in the News Roundup newsroom. Right off the bat, President Trump warning Russia if they don't soon hit the brakes on their ongoing invasion of Ukraine and return to the negotiating table. He's thinking about providing Ukraine with long-range Tomahawk missiles, which they so desperately need. Moving along and changing subjects a bit, the World Health Organization, they're called the WHO, now sounding the alarm about a surging number of bacteriological infections, which they claim are highly resistant to antibiotics, warning that these illnesses could threaten some treatments and ultimately turn deadly. And more health-related news to share with you. Former President Joe Biden now undergoing both radiation treatment and hormone therapy as he continues to battle a very aggressive form of prostate cancer. The former commander-in-chief set to celebrate his 83rd birthday next month. And turning now to the world of business and a quick glance at a couple of stories currently making big headlines in finance, commerce, and more. I love big business. A pair of MIT-educated brothers about to go on trial in Manhattan, and they're facing decades in prison for an alleged $25 million cryptocurrency scheme. The two men are charged with conspiracy, wire fraud, and money laundering for a one-of-a-kind heist during which they allegedly manipulated a number of computer bots, and all in order to rip off several other cryptocurrency traders. I don't quite understand it so much. Not a big fan of that cryptocurrency, but I suppose that's one way to make a buck. There's another way to make a buck, guys. It's called getting a job. Scooting along to some Pentagon-related news now, and Lockheed Martin scored a huge $24 billion deal from the U.S. government to produce nearly 300 F-35 fighter jets for our nation's Air Force. You know, that deal involving a number of different types of aircraft and breaking down to a relatively affordable average of only $80 million apiece. $80 million airplanes. And Davey, don't be cheap. Come on, producer Davey. I want one of those things for Christmas. And Christmas, this is October, November. What are we, just a little over 2 months away from the big holiday. And speaking of that big holiday, some holiday-related news. A bunch of retailers say they're now planning to cut back on their upcoming seasonal hires due to their growing uncertainty over both the cost of tariffs and the state of the U.S. economy. And perhaps that's accurate, but Amazon and Walmart, they always go on hiring sprees over the holidays. People are shopping online. That means lots and lots of jobs. And now it's time for a quick look at the lighter side of news, and here's what's cooking. If you think you know what a taco is, I'm not exactly sure what a taco is, but perhaps our editor Pranav can show us a picture of what an authentic taco looks like. If you don't know what a taco is, then you apparently haven't been to France, or you haven't been to France lately. Travelers who've just made the journey across the pond say they've been checking out a fast food joint over there called O Tacos, which is supposed to be something like their version of our Taco Bell, but which they claim serves up grub that's nothing like tacos at all. And I know tacos. The annoyed customers say the chain offers up a bunch of menu items, which they call French tacos, have wacky names, and look something like Hot Pockets. If I want a Hot Pocket, Davey, I'll cruise down to aisle 8 at the grocery store. I know exactly where they are. Those aren't tacos. They're Hot Pockets. They also complain that they come with an assortment of weird ingredients like goat cheese, chicken cordon bleu, and even French fries. Yeah, sounds like a taco to me. In the end, one irate customer says that France's top tacos are something like a cross between a panini, a crunch wrap, and a burrito, and that basically the only thing they have in common with real tacos is the tortilla. And even that's kind of debatable. You know, when it comes to tacos, I'm pretty much of an expert. And as everyone knows, back in 1984, I wrote a wonderful book called Tacoology for Dummies. And as producer Davey, as you know full well, Davey, that was on the New York Times bestseller list for either 38 or 39 weeks. Which one was it?
Oh, yeah, Bill. It was on the bestseller list for 39 weeks.
Yeah, it's an absolutely fascinating read. You know, here's the thing about tacos. When you want an authentic taco made with love, care, and attention, with quality ingredients freshly prepared by a legitimate taquero, you make a run for the border. Taco Bell. And here in L.A., there's a Taco Bell on every corner. And Davey, is Taco Bell, is that a national chain or is that mostly Southern California?
Oh, yeah, Bill. Everybody's got Taco Bell near them.
Well, there you go. Taco Bell. Hey, what you don't do when you want a taco, you don't go to O Tacos in Paris, as in France. When you're in France, I highly recommend the French onion soup, maybe the French fries, or maybe a plate full of escargot with parsley, shallots, and a nice butter garlic sauce, and maybe just a little bit of ketchup. By the way, butter-drenched escargot and greasy tacos are the perfect health food. If you eat enough of them, you'll grow up to be big and strong like your podcast host, or maybe like the young lady who's featured in our next story. A bodybuilder from Australia just set a Guinness World Record by doing 733 pull-ups in just 1 hour. The 32-year-old shattering the old mark of 725 by lifting her chin over the bar an average of more than a dozen times every minute. The new record holder says she originally began training for her accomplishment because she wanted to do something which no one had ever done before, and because she was kind of anxious to see what her mind and her body were capable of. She also says that at first she was hoping to go for the 24-hour record and actually did 3,500 pull-ups in about 12 hours before she wound up tearing her bicep muscle and then kind of changing her plans. Look, here's the deal, and I'm not trying to one-up anybody. 733 pull-ups, pretty impressive. But Dave, I don't know if you know this, I once did 734 pull-ups. Have you heard about that?
I have not heard about that, Bill.
Well, I did mine a different way. I did one pull-up once a week for 734 weeks, which took me just over 14 years, but in my mind, that still counts. I think I'm a record holder. I think in life, Davey, it's always best to pace yourself. You think it's best to pace yourself, Davey?
Well, Bill, I think you did well to pace yourself.
I did very well to pace myself. And you never want to overdo it, especially with those pull-ups or chin-ups, whatever they're called. By the way, and this is nothing other than a point of curiosity, but Davey, do we know if she's perhaps ill?
Why do you say that, Bill? No, I don't think she's ill.
I was looking at that photograph, if we have the photograph, and in her midsection, there's like 6 different squares. So does she have some kind of a belly issue?
Bill, that's a six-pack. That's a six-pack. That's what you get when you work out and you're in good shape.
Oh, I thought a 6-pack was 6 cans of Pepsi and a little plastic thing on top, and you carry it to the beach or to the picnic. I had no idea. In any event, 733 pull-ups in 1 hour. Not bad, and she's off to a pretty good start. But she looks kind of thinly, and she might need a plate full of tacos and or escargots. Thoughts or comments on the lighter side of news, drop us a note. We are at newsroundupwithbill@gmail.com. Davey, to the email bag, what are folks saying on a glorious Monday afternoon?
Okay, Bill, we start off with one from Pierre in New Orleans.
Hello, Pierre. New Orleans, the French Quarter, I believe, yes?
Indeed. Well, it doesn't say, but I assume.
Yeah, what's up, Pierre?
Pierre says, I've been to that taco place in Paris, and whatever you call them, they're much better than the fast food slop you get over here.
Taco Bell is not fast food slop. It's barely fast food. That's fine Mexican dining. Some of the best food on the planet. If you like Mexican food and you know a little something about Mexican food, and I'm the guy who penned the book, once again, if we have the picture, I wrote Tacoology. I almost said toxic. Tacoology for Dummies. I know good food. Taco Bell's got that good food. Pierre, you're out of line, sir. And Davey, who's up next?
Okay, Bill, here's a different view from Carlos in San Antonio.
Bring it on, Carlos. What do you got?
He says, we take our Tex-Mex seriously down here, and those atrocities definitely ain't tacos. Hate to think what kind of hot sauce they got, too.
Yeah, the French ought to stick to what they do. They make crepes, and they make, as we said, escargot. And you like the French onion soup, Davey?
Who doesn't, Bill? Okay, fine cuisine.
That is fine cuisine when you're in France. But when you want tacos, you come back stateside, and you go to Taco Bell. And one more, we got to wrap it up.
Okay, Bill, here's one from Morley in Hartford, Connecticut.
Hiya, Morley.
And he says, that push-up woman is pretty impressive. I can barely do one.
Yeah, well, a push-up is a push-up. What she was doing was a pull-up. And that six-pack, those abs, six-pack abs, they were pretty impressive. And I've got my six-pack as well. But unfortunately, David, I can't get to the buttons to undo it and show. But I got a six-pack that looks just like hers. That lovely young lady, record setter from down under, from Australia. And now it is time for us to call it a wrap on the Don't Strain Your Brain Monday edition of the Big News Roundup. And before we go, as we do each and every day here on the program, we share with you a very notable quote. These inspiring words coming us to today from Diane Keaton, who said, "A sense of freedom is something that happily comes with age and experience." Now, Diane Keaton, David, was she related somehow to Buster Keaton, the silent film star?
No, Bill. Buster Keaton was way before her time. He was a silent movie star, mainly.
But Michael Keaton was her husband, right? The movie star?
No, Bill. Michael Keaton and Diane Keaton are not related, Bill.
I get my Keatons mixed up. Keaton, by the way, was a popular and trend-setting American actress who won an Academy Award for her iconic title role in the movie Annie Hall, and she did pass away this weekend at the age of 79. She will be sorely missed by her family, her friends, her legion of fans worldwide, and I was one of those fans. Anytime Diane Keaton's in a movie, it's going to be a good movie. And now it is time for us to bust on out. But before we go, don't forget the News Roundup motto. Ask not what your podcast can do for you. Ask what you can do for your podcast. And there's one thing you can do, and that's simply subscribe to the program so you never miss a single episode. And now our time is officially up, so have an awesome day today. Please stay safe. Let's all continue to watch out for one another. And now, Engineer Jamie, who sits right here to my left, we're going to gently dim the lights. We'll fade to black. And we'll see you right back here tomorrow on a terrific Tuesday.